Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the American Scouser TV's Fantasy Premier League show. I am joined by the man who lost his green arrow from Chicago, my co-host. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing well. Glad to be back here and talking a bunch of nonsense again for another hour with you, as I always appreciate and love doing on a Thursday night. So I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing good. You know, we got the fantasy game going. We'll get into our moves. We'll get into how things are going. I definitely feel good about my team. I will say I'll share some things. You know, I had a great week. It could have been like a literally monumental week because I made two big mistakes in my moves. One that I did an hour before the deadline, and one that I refused to follow up on my gut with 5 minutes before the deadline. So both of which hurt me immensely, about another 140,000 places. Would have put me somewhere firmly in the top 30,000 of the game if I had gone with just two separate moves that I had in play right up till the end. But you make moves for a reason. One move you should all make if you haven't done it yet is to go into the game right now and join the open league. You can still join the American Scouser Cup. Is open. The code is on the screen. Go ahead and find that code and go ahead and sign up today. And if you do, you might find yourself on this leaderboard. It's always good when one of those lines is bolded. That means your number is on the screen. I think this might be the first time we've ever done a show where I've been in the top 10 of this league, which probably isn't a way to advertise your ability as a
Bickler's second?
Yeah, he's second in the league overall. And I didn't want to get to this because it was honestly part of the item that upset me the most was those moves would have got me right in line with him. He had the huge substitution, which helped him because I think forget who it was, Anderson or somebody got subbed in for him at a 15-point clip because I think Botman didn't play. So he got the auto sub with Anderson from Crystal Palace. But he had a great week. He's made some really good moves, but he is second overall in the game. Paul Bickler is top, I believe it's 50,000 overall in the entire game.
This is the worst, the darkest timeline we're
basically as bad as the game can get. That's basically where I'm looking at. But yeah, he is second overall in the American Scouser League. We'll just hold a place of gratitude that by next week he will not be in second place. But in all seriousness, really good job by him. He's actually made really good moves all year. He still has his wild card. I made my wild card, which was a big reason why I've made the move that I have, and we'll talk about that later. We've talked about it in the past. But let's look at last week. It was an interesting week. If we look at kind of the team of the week, not much you could really do with this because I don't know outside of maybe Trippier, Ben White, and a few people who had Ollie Watkins and those who jumped in on the Morris double up, right? Like people have jumped off Odegaard. Nobody holds Dominguez. Almiron hasn't been a fantasy asset this year. Sufal, Colwell, Johnson, right? More and more this season, I'm recognizing. So we were
we just both saw the comment. Yeah.
We both know he's not late. He was here. He's like, sorry, I'm late, but did I miss anything? Great game. Yeah, it is a great game. Such a great game that some fool from North Carolina finds his way to second in the overall table and top 50,000 overall. But if you really are late, then you can at least acknowledge the fact that I gave you a lot of credit for the way that you've been playing this game and the fact that you haven't used your wild card yet. So use it wisely, my friend. You have a chance. He says, told you it's stupid. This is his way of insulting the game and our attention to the game by saying even an idiot like him can do well. All right. So you might be right on some fronts of that comment. But in all seriousness, the guy really has done a good job so far in managing a team. This is a great graphic that you shared. And I thought this was kind of important to look at. It's the top 10 overall players through the last 4 game weeks. And I think that's usually, I think we've said before, like you have to bank this game on anywhere from 4 to 6 game weeks in the past and in the future. What on this screen jumps out at you? Anything on this screen that absolutely astonishes you?
I don't think there's much astonishment as much as had you replaced Holland with Alvarez and saved that plus 4 million and invested it in the midfield and had Son, Saka, Salah, Odegaard, and Trippier in the back, you would be flying right now. And that's completely different from where we were last year at this point, where if you didn't have Holland up to this point, you were really far behind and you were trying to dig yourself out of a big hole. So I think now this year's been interesting because while Holland has been pretty much auto-captained, it hasn't had as much of an impact as it did last year, especially because so many people own him this year. Not to say that a lot of people didn't own him last year because they did, but it was closer to the 60 percentile at this range, at this rate, or this stage in the season. Not quite, what is it, 85, 90% that it is now is something absurd. So yeah, it's interesting how you could save so much money if you did a like for like between the strikers there and invested it anywhere else, and you would be ahead of everyone right now.
Well, I will tell you that that 60 to 80 to 90% ownership is going to decrease shortly because
Absolutely.
he has a few more performances like he has, and he's not going to stay on my side because, you know, I looked today and it shocked me actually to see that he has not once this year been considered the highest point scorer for a week. Not once. The one time he had his huge week, the 20 points, Son also got 20. But because his ownership is less, he was considered the top player of the week. So if you actually were smart enough to have the other players and didn't captain Holland every single week this season, you would be doing better than if you had, which is it's comical to the level of his effective ownership. And I think that's where it really comes down to. This graphic jumps out to me as making a lot of sense because I made my wild card 3 weeks ago. I have Son, I have Trippier, I have Holland, I have Alvarez. Until this week, I had Saka. And it makes sense that I moved up almost 1.2 million in 3 weeks, which isn't easy to do unless you make moves and make them like stacked. You have to make a move and then they have to work for you. I had we'll talk about it later. I had a negative move this week as far as points go. I'd say the 2 things that jump out at me on this screen is that Pedro Neto has been able to score 28 points for a Wolves team that I don't remember scoring a goal in 4 weeks. And 2, that Ben White is the second highest scoring defender, I believe, in the game, only to Trippier, and that's only because Newcastle has gotten 3 out of the last 4 matches clean sheets.
Right.
You know, if you asked me at the beginning of the year, I would have gave you 5 different Arsenal defenders that you should have in your fantasy side instead of Ben White. But if you look back, since Ben White signed for Arsenal, he plays, I think it's like the second most minutes per 90 of any Arsenal defender. The only player to play more is Gabriel, and the manager tried to basically bandage him. Timuchin jumps in with, I refuse to reveal the secrets bearing my winning streak. Part of that secret is starting players who don't play. Behind, not bearing. Sorry, I looked down there. Yeah, his behind or bearing. The truth is, these guys love to rip on the fantasy show, but then they listen in. So it's probably why Bickler is second overall. And actually why Timuchin is on this great winning streak is they get our tips and tricks, and then we don't follow our own guidance. And then it breaks right in front of our own very eyes. So let's take a look at the players coming in. No surprise, Son and Watkins, top of that list, right like they were the top of the last list we were looking at for points over the last 4 weeks. Matty Cash, lots of value there at 4.8, not just the fact that he is the most Polish Englishman I've ever seen, but then we also have Madison and Trippier as well. any of these players that you would put a douse of cold water on, players you think that our listeners should be avoiding or thinking twice about bringing into their sides?
Not any off of these lists specifically. I think Villa has their next 6 games. If you run it through kind of like a fixture difficulty rating scale, that's probably the easiest next 6 game weeks. They've got Wolves, West Ham, Luton, Forest, Fulham, Spurs. And so from a defensive standpoint, that looks pretty solid. From a going forward standpoint, that Cash has been able to also give, that looks really solid. So I think the only one that I might reconsider is if you have one of Son or Madison, don't bring the other one back in. Kind of limit yourself to one Spurs midfielder, maybe not so much 2 of them. And yes, it's actually 515,500 of those cash transfers are my burner accounts. I do put a lot of time into this game, and I do want to make sure that the best Polish player in the world right now gets his respect.
I mean, it's fair seeing that Lewandowski's not playing at the moment for Barca. He did go off hurt. But even if he was, I'm not sure that he would do anything to what Matty Cash is doing right now. Because honestly, the thing about Matty Cash is he offers you, and that fixture ticker, of looking at what Villa has coming up, it's about as good of a run as any side has all year long. And you're getting a team that doesn't give up weak goals and a guy who creates, whether they're in a 3 or a 4. And I think that's really important to say. Like, we love the wingback in the Premier League, right? We love the attacking fullback. But then no one realizes that, like, those teams like Chelsea drop to a back 4, and all of a sudden Ben Chilwell doesn't mean anything. He's just dying on your bench or dying losing you money. So speaking of players that were probably costing you money and on their way out of a club.
Speaking of dying,
I have to imagine you are one of the 790,000 who sold to Stupion this week.
Yes, that is a true number, is that I am one of them. I'm also one that has gotten rid of Mbuemo. I got rid of Chilwell last week. A little spoiler, I did play my wild card this week. So Saka's gone as well. I don't have any of those players in my team. And I started with all 5. I think first game week 1, I had all 5 of those guys. And yeah, obviously there's some here that makes sense. Estupiñán's hurt for a long time. Chilwell's hurt for a long time. Also was underperforming. Saka might be hurt for a while. I guess we'll see. Mbuemo has been underperforming. And then Rashford in that United mess. I maybe with the emergence of Højlund, given the Champions League game and given last week, I think there is some merit for a connection between Rashford and Højlund to warrant maybe keeping him in your side if he's feeding Højlund and Højlund is able to finish the way he has been. But besides that, because they've been so turbulent going forward, I get why people haven't wanted to invest that much money in a United midfielder.
Yeah, obviously Estupiñán and Chilwell look like they're going to be long-term injuries, which is really, troubling and tough for both their clubs. Saka, we'll talk about, I'll whine about my Saka mistake last week. I transferred him out before this week. Should have just left him in for one more week. I didn't think he would start, and I just didn't want to carry his dead weight, and I was already planning to move him on in the next couple weeks. So I move him out. He gets the goal. He scores the points. It frustrates me to no end. I drop points that I didn't need to. Then at least Arteta's stupid enough to start him midweek again off of an injury-plagued day and play him in the Champions League. He goes off injured, and now it does look like he's going to spend a little time on the sideline. So I guess the move kind of works out in the long run. I was on Mbuemo maybe for 1 week or maybe not. I thought about bringing him in. He's a weird one for me because I just can't get behind Brentford as like a scoring force as much as they had some results, and they still have Wisa. They have the Shade kid when he is playing, and eventually if they don't sell him, Tony's going to be back, and this is going to be right back to his team, his penalties, his goals. And I think the thing about Mbuemo is I'm not a big fan of bringing in players that you have to transfer out. Like, I think I've told you that before. I made a goal this year. If I bring a guy in, he's going to be there for a month, not a week, and then I move him out, because that is just so much volatility in your side. And just you only get 38 free moves a year. Like, you got to use them judiciously if you don't want to take huge drops. And that's another part of where I think my strategy so far this year really is paying off and paying dividends. It's the first year I've ever stayed this true for this long. And I won't lie, I want to break it this week. So I might be looking for you to talk me off my ledge. But
I don't know. I want to catch up to you. So
this wasn't, you're just going to talk me right off that ledge, onto that ledge. So this is another great graphic that you shared with me this week that I thought would be fun for us to talk about. It is the expected goals. It's basically goals and assists, and it's the expected number versus what they've actually performed through the first 7 game weeks. So Ollie Watkins tops that table. He had an expected goal involvement of 3.91. After last week's epic performance, he ends up with 10. Now, I will say this is one of those jaded stats, because he would have been on the underachiever list last week if we had shown this, but he had 3 goals and an assist. So it really makes it look like he had one of those like amazing weeks. I'm more interested, one, because I have the player in Diaby and Alvarez here on this list. But how surprising is it that none of the big hitters are on this list? Is that because they were expected to do so well, or because guys like Mo Salah, Erling Haaland, Rashford, Fernandez have been so disappointing overall fantasy-wise this year?
I think so. The expected goal involvements takes into account how probable scoring the goal or making the assist was, and how, and kind of it evaluates all that. So I think the big hitters, what we're missing from this list, what we're seeing is that they're just producing at a rate that they're supposed to be producing at, right? If we have Haaland, who is on, let's say, 5 expected goal involvements this year, he's got 8 goals and no assists. I mean, he's producing within the range where we felt like he'd be producing. My question for you that I wanted to kind of ask to see what your thoughts were is, which, if you had to pick between maybe 2 or 3 of these players to keep this sort of efficiency going, who would they be?
Oh, I will say this. I've always liked Ollie Watkins, and we've talked about their upcoming fixtures. So I think Watkins and Diaby are easy ones. I think Diaby might be, like, he easily, outside of Szoboszlai, might be the signing of the year in the Premier League, in my opinion, for the money they paid, for the quality of the player they got, and for how important he is to their side and the way he's changed things. And, as much as it pains me to say this, I believe Julian Alvarez, outside of Rodri, might be their second most valuable and important player right now. I think he's honestly is their second best attacker to Haaland. I think he offers them the most going forward. As long as Alvarez continues to get consistent starting minutes at City, I think he is by far their best fantasy asset. And I don't even think it's close. And it's not just value. I think there's just as good of a chance every week Alvarez can outscore Haaland. Now, whether you have the stones and the wherewithal to make those moves, that's a whole nother story. Like, I want to drop Haaland and move my lowest midfielder to Mo. I know I won't do it, but that's what I want to do.
Yeah.
But Alvarez, we'll see.
The
other one, I was just going to say, the other one that I really believe is maybe the best long shot and differential on the whole screen is, I think that Burnley's fixtures are about to turn, and Lyle Foster may be the pick of the litter. I plan to downgrade Morris to Foster, and at some point make him my budget enabling player that plays big minutes. I picked up Morris for the double game week. I picked up Morris for a couple other fixtures in the next 2 or 3 weeks. If Lyle Foster continues to play as far forward as he does, and basically, company is basically telling him, you're the only person I believe can compete and score goals in the Premier League, go score them. As long as he doesn't pick up crazy ass red cards, I think it's Foster, Alvarez, and Diaby. What says you?
I like those picks. Absolutely. I think to your Alvarez point, he is a much better playmaker overall than Haaland is. And Haaland, I think, undisputedly, probably one of the best finishers of the ball in the world. But his link up play, his hold up play, he doesn't offer as much as Alvarez offers. Alvarez could be in many different spots on the field at any time and be able to pick up the ball and feed Haaland or feed Grealish on the side or feed Foden. Like he is able to play, to be the guy to play everyone or be the one that's finishing because he's also a great finisher. Whereas Haaland, as we know, he makes incredible runs and he has a good instinct at goal. But if he only touches the ball 7 times a game and 3 of those are just okay shots, that's the most you're going to get out of it. You're not going to get more opportunity like you might with Alvarez. So I think that number is sustainable. I like the Diaby shot as well. I think the last one that I probably would consider would maybe be Hwang Hee-chan, just because if Neto can still make the way he has been, despite how trash Wolves have been, and Hwang Hee-chan is on the receiving end of that, I think that he'll continue to kind of just hover around it, just enough goal involvements to maybe be worth a punt on every once in a while. Because that's outside of that, I can't see anyone else keeping up the sort of production that they've been doing. I think Brighton might be in a little bit of trouble. They've had some injuries, and so Matoma, I don't think he's going to be able to keep that going. Obviously, Lamptey's not awful, but he's not a Stupinian. And so I guess we'll see how that goes. But yeah, it might get a little rocky for the Seagulls coming up here.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of where they're going, and I will say this: I think Lamptey's a better player than I think people forget how good he was that first year with Brighton when he crashed on the scene. I think people also forget that once again he was a Chelsea player, that an academy player that they sent on loan and then sold because they didn't think he was good enough, and then bought 5 guys that didn't play as well as him for a year. So it just lets you know, Chelsea supporters, you were shit 5 years ago in the transfer market just as much as you are today. But I think what it comes down to with Lamptey is there anyone up top that can score the goals? And I think João Pedro shows that he can score goals, but he scores them when he creates them. They need Evan Ferguson to be healthy and be their point number 9 central figure of all the things offense. And as long as Danny Welbeck is their number 1 avenue for goals outside of wide area players, they have no chance of making a big step forward. And I'd probably stay away. I like the Wolves shout. My only argument there would be I think there might be better value in the cheap forward positions, in a Lyle Foster, in a Morris, even in an Archer. And I think if you're going to fill a void and you're going to spend, why wouldn't you spend the extra $500,000 or $1 million on Neto?
Sure.
Because I feel like you're getting the player with the higher upside. But I don't disagree with you that he's a good punt and he'd be a great differential. Maybe some players we don't want. These are the underachievers. So I don't think there's any surprise that Nicholas Jackson is the top of this list. I would say he's probably the biggest underachiever in the entire Premier League when it comes to a fantasy perspective. I think he's the biggest underachiever when it comes to a major buy perspective. And it doesn't shock me that it was Chelsea that made the mistake on both fronts. Enzo Fernandez, I think, is a little hard done and unfair. He's genuinely a defensive midfielder that isn't supposed to create or do other things. I know he costs so much money, and maybe that's where the expected goals comes into play. I know he had the one big miss. It seems like that's really harsh for me. Eze, for me, is the biggest disappointment of any player on this screen, even though Fernandez and Rashford were tabbed for big things. And the reason is that I just saw Eze last year. I thought he was about to kick on. When he didn't move on to a bigger club, I thought this would be his year of taking over. He was in your side for how long? Until you wildcarded?
Until today. He has been here since day one until today. So I absolutely know what the disappointment of Eze feels like, because every week I've been sitting here rooting for the kid, and he did have a return last week. So I mean, I'll give him that. It was a botched corner, but hey, I mean, an assist is an assist, so you got to take it, right? So overall, it has been disappointing. He has been booted from my side, and hopefully, just for the sake of him, maybe we see him bring it back a little bit towards the end of the year here. I mean, towards the end of the first half of the year. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan there. I don't think Eze has done a great job so far. I'm also not a fan of how Crystal Palace is attacking teams. So I just don't think, from a fantasy perspective, unless you're trying to snap clean sheets or maybe get a cheap keeper, you're trying to smash and grab with with an Anderson at defense every once in a while to fill a role. I just don't really like it. No shock that Neil Mopai is sitting at a 0.0 goals and assists actual. I mean, he did play for Everton. I guess Chilwell probably surprises me a little bit on this list. Rashford definitely does, except for the fact of the mistakes that United has had and just the downtrod play that they've had overall and some of the strife on the pitch. I do like your call of Højlund. I think Højlund might be a player as this season goes on, that at that $7 million mark, it might be impossible to overlook him eventually, because I think he might become almost like a template, set it and forget it type of second striker. I do question who the other player is from United. I currently sit on Bruno. I just get caught up in the fact that he's on free kicks, penalties, corners, plays 90 minutes every match. Like, statistically, they're going to score goals. Their fixtures are good. And when that happens, it should be him. It hasn't been him. And I've made this mistake twice this year. So I'm a little disappointed in myself again. But let's go into next week and start talking about our captaincy pick. So this is the predicted points for all players, including percentage of ownership. So not a big surprise to me that Heung-min Son is at the top of the list. Predicted to score 7 points. They're on the road at Luton. Then you have Mo Salah, Bruno Fernandes. Madison, Bruno Fernandes, Rashford, Sterling, down to Holland, Richarlison, which is hilarious and comical in itself. Luis Diaz, which is interesting to me, to be totally honest, at only 9.5% ownership. Really good differential there. And then Udogie from Spurs, which, again, someone's going to have to explain to me why these projections always have him above Pedro Porro when Pedro Porro's expected goal involvement in every single game is 2 times as high as his, and he doesn't pick up weak yellow cards and random opportunities. So where will you go with your captaincy this week? And how many of these players will you have in that wild carded side?
Right now, I have 1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay,
I've got,
not bad.
Yes, and I think I do think I'm going to go with the chart here. And I thought of this before I saw this, and I'm feeling just as good afterwards. I think going with Heung-min Son is the best way to go this week. I don't know. Spurs are exciting moving forward if the ball is moving forward enough. I know that they struggled against 10 men and against 9 men this past week. But I find that sometimes teams just struggle when you're playing against a team that loses a man, because everything gets so compact. And if you're used to playing a certain way, having to play a team that loses a man and having them change, you don't always adapt as well as you would like to. So I think aside from the Liverpool game, they've been playing really open. They've been playing really well. So Son for me is most likely my captain. I wouldn't mind a Salah shout. I would stay away from the City forwards. I know Arsenal's away. I'm not saying it's the toughest fixture of the year, but we might not see as much production there versus Spurs going away to Luton.
Yeah, I am definitely with you there. I am on Son right now as my captain. He is set in, and I want to say I'm confident I won't change it, but that's what I said last Friday night, and then I made Holland my captain with 10 minutes to go before the window closed, and how'd that do me? Never so much that I wish not to wake up half in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, look at my phone, and go, still got 10 minutes, make some changes. Not smart. I think it's a good shout. I think Arsenal will be defensive minded. I think they'll try to be resolute at the back. At the most, I could see that being a 1-2 goal game. Spurs could go to Luton and score 5. And I think the problem with Spurs against Liverpool was even against 10 men, and even in some ways against 9, they almost looked like they knew they were supposed to go win it, but they were so afraid that at any moment they'd still make a mistake and lose it. And they still looked open with 10 men. I mean, we scored a goal with 10 men, and it took three others.
Goals.
Yeah, well, I meant the first one that took 3 other guys to take off the board. But I mean, we scored that goal as if it were nothing too. Like we did it the same way we would have if there were 11. We turned them over in a tough spot on the pitch, and in 2 passes we were in, and the ball was in the back of the net. And I think Spurs learns from that, and I also think this is Luton people. Like they went to Everton, they got a couple goals, and they got a win. That's nothing you write home about when you show up and put in the performance they did against against Burnley, I'm sorry. So, they are still Luton. In my opinion, they are still the least talented team in this entire division. There might be 10 teams, at least 5, clearly, at least 5 that are better in the championship. Leicester would beat them 5 days a week if they played 7 times. And I'm not even questioning that. Like, it's, and I think Ipswich would as well, to be totally honest. And maybe even Sunderland for how well they're playing so far this year in the championship. So I think this Luton team had lightning in a bottle last year. They found a way to get themselves up, and good on them. You can win that match at Wembley and give your supporters something special to remember. I just got this feeling they're going to have as many special moments of remembering other teams celebrating big lopsided victories in their stadium. And I have this feeling that this could be one of the more lopsided. Because I think if I'm Tottenham, I'm showing up this weekend and I'm trying to drop 10 to shut everyone up about the 3 points I was gifted against Liverpool.
Right.
I haven't dropped any points. It's not my fault the refs had a nightmare of an afternoon. And by the way, Liverpool got 2 guys sent off, whether or not we think Jones's was a red card or not. To be fair, the guy could have ended up with a broken leg off the tackle, accidental or not coming over the top of the ball, so it can always be a red. And we're on the same page. We both know that Jota has to be sent off for the second yellow. The first one's probably mysterious and nefarious, but in real time, not one Liverpool supporter said that wasn't a yellow card when you saw it in replay 5 times, and the refs don't get replay. So it wasn't Spurs' fault that guys got sent off on Liverpool. It wasn't Spurs' fault that the refs made a mare of the game. And they did what they had to do and left with 3 points. So as much as we can be frustrated about the result, they're buzzing. And I almost feel like they just listened to 10 days of, like, they walked out of that wanting some credit, and they got nothing.
Yeah.
So if I'm Spurs, especially their captain, I'm licking my chops to play the worst defense to maybe play in the Premier League since Norwich's team 4 years ago that gave up 100 goals in the first 20 games or whatever it was. Like, for me, I think this one has Spurs written all over it. The question is it Maddison? Is it Son?
Right.
But I'll give you the answer. It's not Richarlison.
It's not Richarlison. That's for sure.
I couldn't even believe he was on that list. It blew my mind. So let's take a look at your team. Last week, talk to me, Goose. Talk to me.
Well. So at least I brought Morris in. I mean, that was the highlight of the transfer. I took Chilwell down and I brought Morris in, and that was pretty much the extent of my transfers. I contemplated doing the wild card last week, but I felt like I still had enough guys where I felt comfortable enough about not. If I was already making 2 transfers, I didn't want to then do a wild card to sort of waste doing those 2 transfers to begin with.
You never make a wild card on a double transfer week. If you have 2 transfers, you mistakenly didn't make another transfer the week before to maximize points. Like the wild card is in itself a free hit. So I think you made the right choice with that being the case.
Yeah, and I thought about taking a -4 to shift things around a little bit, but overall, I can't be too upset about what I did because I chose what I felt was the right things to choose. It's just that, who would have expected a Stupinian to get a -2? And so I think that was the big killer. And I think I don't know, it's just if I, again, like you, if I just placed my captaincy elsewhere, I'd have a better week too. But we're at that point where it gets really difficult trying to tell yourself to get off of Haaland when he's owned by so many. Because we've talked about it every week. If you don't captain Haaland and he goes off for a hat trick, you've dug yourself a big enough hole where you're most likely not climbing out of it unless you do have some great differentials and have some great captaincy picks that make up for it.
So you brought Chilwell down, was it to Anderson?
Yes.
And that gave you the funds to go to
Morris? I'm sorry, Chilwell down to Cash, and then I went from João Pedro to Morris.
Yep. Got it. And that was a great move, obviously. And I think that was a good move even for the next 2 to 3 game weeks. Like Morris actually has decent fixtures coming up. There's at least 2 or 3 times to play him in the next few weeks if you wanted to. I'm sure he's out of your team if you wildcarded. I get that. I wouldn't keep a Luton player in my team if I wildcarded either. So when we look at your wildcard, how many of these players stayed? Son, Haaland?
Son, Haaland, Salah, Cash, Udogie. Those are the only ones that stayed.
So you ended up moving off Botman. You gave up on Botman and you gave up on your keepers. Where did you rotate your keepers to between Pickford and Turner?
I went to Areola and Turner. I'm still thinking about maybe changing Turner because I don't really have to, I guess, but I feel like it's a weird thing for me that I'm trying to justify doing a wild card and not changing my other keeper. But because he's still so cheap, and I think there's enough value elsewhere where I'm not too bothered by it. This is here. I'm just going to put this up just to make it easier to see. So this is where we're at right now. I obviously still have a little bit of time before the deadline, so I'm still trying to work some things out. I'm not 100% on my defenders. I like my midfield a lot. I like the forward line a lot. I like the 3-headed monster, so to speak. But I'm still sort of in flux with where I want to be defensively. I just worry that Burn and Lascelles are either one or two are the wrong Newcastle guy, and then I might just be wasting some money on either one.
Yeah, I don't think I would have Lascelles in my because I don't think Botman will be out that long. And having the double Newcastle defense makes a lot of sense if you have like Trippier and Schär like I do, or you have Trippier and Botman at times, because you have the attacking returns. The triple Spurs, like you might be able to do better than Pape Sarr as a midfield option.
Yeah, he was cheap, so
yeah, but is it 4.5 or 5?
4.6.
4.6. So I mean, there's not great options in that area, but I think if you like kind of balance some of the budgets a little bit more, maybe looked at a few different areas. I mean, the midfield's great. I'd be worried a little bit about Diaby, and I have him right now if you have him and Watkins, you're putting a lot of eggs into that Cash, Watkins, Diaby. You have 3 on one team, you have 2 City attackers, you have 3 Spurs. So like in a weekend where things don't go well for those 3 sides, it really puts you in a tough, and we've talked about that before. Like it's like diversifying your portfolio. If you have all your eggs in one basket, it's great on the week they score 5 goals. It's really, really something you struggle with. But I don't hate it. I'll be honest with you. I think there's a couple tweaks here. How much money do you have left in the bank here?
0. I don't have anything.
So you have nothing left here. That might make me start to think about, and it's funny too, now right at the weeks where clean sheets are starting to come into play and guys are starting to score based off other teams not scoring, you're actually you've really minimized your defense here. Like you do not have a large investment in your defense. I mean, what's your largest defender there? Is it Udogie at 5?
Sorry, let's just Cash at 4.8.
Wow. Well, I mean, he is the greatest defender in the world and Polish.
Easy decision.
Wow. And that's my problem. I think my issue with this side is it's not an issue, but my question about this side would be, I don't know that you can make a great team having $29 million tied up in forwards.
Right.
And I'd be concerned, and as someone who talked to you before about like not wild carding unless a team is built, like you shouldn't have to move a player off this side for 6 weeks. And I want to be honest with you. If you look at that in your heart of hearts, you can't tell me that there aren't at least 5 guys you'll want to move out in the next 6 weeks.
No, you look at the fixtures, Villa and Spurs have the best next 6 fixtures, and Alvarez and Haaland are Alvarez and Haaland, and that pretty much just leaves Mo, Jared Bowen, and my Newcastle defenders. So between those 4, maybe, but I weirdly feel pretty confident, which means I'm going to get like 27 points next week, and I'll be sitting here next week saying, yeah, you were right. I should have done everything different.
I'm not saying everything different. I think you should seriously consider your Newcastle defenders. I think there's ways to move the money around here. The other thing that I think is if you're going to go, I think there's ways to go a little bit cheaper on your forward line somehow.
Like that.
Well, that's the easiest way, but you got to have real stones, and I don't know that you have those. If you think about it right now, if you literally brought that down to whatever striker you like, right? You could bring that down to Højlund, yeah. And you could add 7 million to add.
Yeah.
And I mean, right there, you think about it, that's where you can really, the defense, yeah, you go to Trippier. Immediately, you go right up to Trippier, and then you probably take the Lascelles up to like Trent, and you start really like looking at the things you can do with that side. And listen, this is coming from a guy who's not willing to move on from Haaland yet, but wants to. Like, I really do, because I think the person who like wins the game this year is the guy or girl who is willing to make the like toughest of decisions. And like, he hasn't been good enough to warrant the money. And for years, people moved off Mo when the price got too high and said, this isn't worth it. And honestly, I didn't have Mo earlier because everyone said you can't have a $14 million guy and a $12.5 million guy if you're always going to captain the $14 million guy. Because the whole point of having Mo for the longest time was the set it and forget it captain.
Yeah.
So I still like what you've done with this side. I just think you could actually do more with it, whether you keep Haaland or not. But I really do like how you're building it out. I also still question when you look at Mo's production, as good as it is from the midfield standpoint, if you're not captaining him, I don't know that his value at 12.5. And I understand the 5s, but 5s at 12.5 don't. they don't play the way a 9 or a 10 for Diaby, Saka, Odegaard.
Oh, yeah.
And like, there's so many options. I mean, Mo's been great. Don't get me wrong. And I know his history is off the charts, but the last few years haven't been the first 5 years. So
Right.
it's interesting to see what you end up doing. So, not a bad move by any moment there. Not a bad shout. We'll take a look here at my side here in a second when you stop sharing your screen there.
Whoops.
It's fine. Just taking a look here quickly. I scored a 70. I moved up just outside the top 200,000. One freaking point. One goddamn point. But yeah, it was a frustrating week. You know, I have 14 points on the bench. Like, I easily could have started Alvarez over Foden. I easily could have not made the transfer and saved a free transfer and kept Saka instead of Bruno Fernandes. So I'm putting 7 points on the Bruno to Saka transfer stay. I'm putting and getting a free transfer to keep into the kitty this week. I get 6 extra points if I start Alvarez. I could have started Cash, I guess, but I did start a guy with 2 fixtures, so I'm not that upset about it. And then last but not least, I genuinely am not even lying about this. I had the armband on Morris with less than 5 minutes to the deadline.
I did see some people with that. I believe you.
And it was more me feeling like this was coming. Like, I've been talking to you for weeks about how Haaland's been disappointing me, and eventually you can't keep that guy on your roster if he's not your captain. And I mean, I will say this. I feel really, really, really good about the wild card I did in match week 5, even though I ripped it at like a little bit of a drunken stupor while in Florida on vacation. And I didn't feel good about it when I did. But I look today, I have moved up 2.2 million places since I hit the wild card. And I'm pretty sure that's why you wild card. And I don't feel like this team is actually not set up to succeed over the upcoming week. So I will tell you now, I have made my 1 free transfer already. I wasn't going to do this, to be honest. But I did move off Chilwell, and it's not that I didn't want to get rid of him. At one point, I thought I would just stash him on the bench again. But as the week started to move and the players started to talk about who was starting and who might be missing, and Diaby's injury came up, not loving Morris against Tottenham, I made the move and moved Chilwell to Pedro Porro. I saved the extra 0.8 million. So I have about 0.9 right now to work with. There's part of me that wants to make another move this week and really, really go for it. But I've gotten to this week so far without taking any hits. I told you
no
the
hits.
goal was not to take a hit unless I knew, I could guarantee a net positive.
Who are you considering that would make you hit your hit?
I mean, the hits here would probably be someone like Morris adding extra value there and moving into some other attacking player. I have to get off Foden, but on the other hand, I don't want to take a free hit. I almost want to be able to like roll 2 weeks out of the international break and find myself with 2 transfers again. Like, I feel like this week I'm sitting Shar. I think I'm playing because I'm going to play Pedro Porro against Luton. Clearly, I'm playing Alvarez. Like, I think I have Morris and Diaby on the bench and Shar playing. Like, there's nothing really here I feel like I have to do. The guys I'd want to move off of would probably be Bruno Fernandes. I'm not going away from Bowen. I'm not going away from Son. Eventually, I will get away from Foden, but he scores today in the Champions League. Alvarez didn't start, which makes me more confident that he gets 90 minutes of a run out against Arsenal. So I just kind of started looking at it like, I'm not going to waste a transfer on a keeper. And it brings me back to that kind of that mentality I had in the offseason. Like, if I look back last year at the hits I took, they cost me like 140 to 150,000 in finishing position.
Yeah.
Like, I just, you hear the best players, they always say, like, I'll take a hit when I have two free transfers and I'm forced to reconstruct my team with 3 moves.
Right.
But like the people who just do 2 transfers or do 3 transfers on the week after they did 2, and they take the -8 and the -4 the week before, those 12 points, like, literally will drop you 300,000 spots. Like, it doesn't add up for me. So I'm just going to try to just keep starting the right players and hopefully start to captain the right players. And honestly, I really believe, like, I'm going to be paying real attention to the matchups with Bowen, with Son, probably those two, Bowen, Son, and Holland, at this point with this side. I think Bowen has been overlooked once again. Like, he's English. He looks like he should be slow, but he's not. He doesn't look like a finisher, but he can score every single goal. Left foot, right foot, headers, diving headers, volleys, right? Like, he plays with every level of quality that if he was at Manchester United, he'd be their favorite player.
Yeah.
If he was at Arsenal, people would love him. But because he plays for West Ham and came from Hull City, they were like, he's a bum. He's just some English guy. One hit wonder. And I feel like he's probably the most underrated actual talent, not fantasy asset. Like, I think he's actually like an underrated player. And it's probably unfair. And maybe it's my love affair with him that makes it unfair. But to me, he offers everything you need in a Premier League player, and he's perfect fantasy asset because he's the best player on his team, and his teammates know it.
Yeah, and I feel like the situation's been a little weird because there was a time 2 years ago, year and a half ago, where everyone had Bowen in their side because he was just absolutely on fire. But then West Ham went through that awful 15, 20 game skid that they went on, where it just felt like you didn't want to touch anyone near West Ham whatsoever. And so that's the only thing that I think that is just, it's been so up and down with Bowen. But yeah, I think you'd be really upset with yourself if you made another move for a hit, especially if it means a move off Bruno, because it's someone that you just brought in, and then you're doing something you said you didn't want to do at the beginning of the year on a guy that you already just brought in. I think you would be really upset with yourself. So I think you stick it out with what you have, because I think you have 11 guys that you can confidently put out there, and then next week kind of look back and like you said, give yourself the potential for 2 transfers coming out of the international break, because that's going to be huge.
Yeah, I've definitely made a lot of mistakes this year in some start sits, and I've made a couple mistakes in my captaincies and jumped off things. And I gambled that one time. I gambled on Bournemouth earlier with the Mo start against Bournemouth in the second week. Like, I've made some moves that haven't helped me by any means. At the same time, I've been really, really happy with my overall squad management. Like, the way I've brought players in, the moves I've made have been pretty strategic. I will say, when I woke up the morning after hitting the wild card, I was like, what the did you do? Like, we weren't going to do this till match week 9. You had a plan, and I deviated from the plan, but I will say at least the moves that I made worked. And I think that's the biggest thing I would share with the listeners listening tonight and following right now is, like, you have to have conviction of what you're going to do, but you have to make a plan and you have to stick to it. And I appreciate your insight there, because I feel the same way. The player I probably would have moved off of would be my frustration with Bruno. And he'll probably go out this week and have a big week, or, God knows the league will feel like they owe United something for how poorly they're playing, and they'll award him 3 penalties and he'll make all 3 of them. And it would be that type of move on my part. It would be like me moving off him and bringing in, like, and knowing me, I'd go to some like $6 million midfielder that's prime for a big week, and he would just get absolutely snacked. Maybe he'd have an Estupiñán and score himself a -2 when everyone in the world has him in their lineup. Probably the funniest and like greatest laughing moment I had. A buddy of mine's in a league and was like bragging up and down about how he's going to win the league and win this week and how smart he was because he benched Estupiñán and hadn't realized that he had Botman in the starting lineup. And that meant that -2 was getting auto subbed in, and he lost his match by 1. It was the greatest karmic fantasy moment of all time. And he was like talking shit to the other guy for like, well, you started him. And then the guy's like, you do realize, man, in about 3 hours, I'm going to be winning this thing. And he was like, what? He's like, it's kind of like when Bickler found out that Anderson was going to get auto subbed in for him, and he was going second in the table. But I digress. So we're going to get out of here on this, people. Please, if you're watching this show right now and you enjoyed it at all, please give it a like, give it a subscribe on the YouTube channel. If you aren't already a subscriber, go to the YouTube channel, give it a subscription. We have great content between our morning coffee show, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 10 a.m. Central, 9 a.m. Eastern, or, of course, our Monday and Thursday night podcasts that come to you live here at 8 p.m. We also have the Premier League show. We do panel shows, guys doing Redditorials. We're trying to get even more information up, travel stuff on our website of how to get to Liverpool, how to get to matches. So if you're looking to get involved, send us a message. Let us know how you might be able to help. We're always looking for contributors on all levels. And more than anything, pay attention to the deadlines, get your transfers in, and more importantly than anything, don't take a free hit. And if you do take a free hit, make sure you score more than 4 points this week. Anything, my friend, to add as we wrap this thing up on this Thursday night and wish everyone just enough luck to do not as well as us?
I hope everyone does really well, but I hope I do even better than everyone. So I guess the last thing I'll say is I hope it's a fantastic weekend and we don't have to talk about any refereeing anything next week. And I think that's going to be the biggest win for any of us.
I will say, if there was an option last week to put one of the refs on my side, I feel like I would have had one of them. Like someday there will be like a fantasy Premier League ref version of this game where you draft in referees, and it's only if they're brought up on crazy ass conversations. And in that case, I'd probably just make sure that Darren England, Greg Pawson, and Tierney were in my starting front three each and every single week because, well, they are the worst referees in the world. And they only referee in the best league in the world. But to be fair, we got through a whole show, 56 minutes without talking about the refs, and never once did we actually mention, oh, wait, we talked a lot about the Liverpool-Spurs match and how bad the refereeing was. We're Liverpool supporters, people. It's all we can do. So on behalf of myself, the rest of the crew at American Scouser TV, we genuinely appreciate all that you have done to help us grow this channel and all of our programming over the last year. We hope you've enjoyed it. And most importantly, this weekend, we hope you enjoy the matches. Thanks, and have a great day.